You know, one of the things that has been really good for my heart over the last few years and especially the last few months have, hopefully some of you guys have attempted and tried to put paper to pen and journal, you know, or write, somehow expressing yourself. I think it's a really helpful discipline in the masculine journey that you can begin to record, whether you're doing it in a journal workbook like we have, or just pages, you know, to begin to organize your thoughts, to begin to put them on a page. So I've probably been doing that almost 23 or 4 years. And so I have all the journals. I get one that's kind of my journal all the time, and I use it for the year, and then I put it on the shelf. And so one of the things that's been really interesting is to go back just every now and then, and you know, it's almost like it's another way to go back. Another place I like to do the same thing is our picture albums, you know, of the kids when they were born, and I mean, it's just good to go back to remember. And so these journals have really captured a lot of my walk with God. And as we begin to move into these next stages, more and more, warrior, lover, king, recording your story is going to be really important to looking back and seeing what God's done. And also something about, I was the kind of student in high school and college. If I went to class, that probably got me a C. If I took some notes, that probably got me a B. If I rewrote my notes, chances were good I was moving on up into a good range. Does that make sense? So spiritually, I don't know why we don't practice some of that as well. You know, going to church will get you a C. But if you'll start to organize your thoughts and take some notes, you'll find more of those packages that we're talking about. You'll see more. How many moments is God in a day? And that can be an indicting answer. Because the next question is, well, how many do you see? Are you aware? Are you awake, as Gary has said? Are you awake and oriented? Are you paying attention? Are you looking with eyes to see and ears to hear what the kingdom is doing around you and what the king is doing in you? Okay? So journaling, very, very helpful. And I have been going back. We've got a group that is our Wednesday morning group. Some of the guys are here. I've been going back to the journal workbook, which the crazy thing is I was very involved in creating that. And now I'm going back and doing it. I'm answering the questions, and God and I are having a really good time exploring together my heart. Some of the moments I remember where I was when that got written, or where I was when that got fashioned. But a lot of times I'm kind of revisiting some of these things. And there was a quote that caught my heart, and it's going to sound like, yeah, I wrote it. But you know, when your heart recognizes truth and it moves you, that's what you want to. I don't remember writing it. But when I saw it in the journal workbook, it said this: journeying with God is all about discovering how loving and good He is. Do you have that one, Patrick? Journeying with God is all about discovering how loving and good He is, and how good and loving He's made me. Right? Walking with God, journeying with God is discovering how loving and good He is, and how good and loving He has made me. So anytime and every time you are not acting, behaving, right, Christmas tree trip, good and loving, it's really not you. It's this other creature that we know as the false self or the flesh. And Paul makes it very clear. Is the sin you? No. But is the sin in you? Is it something that we contend with, that we battle with? Yes. right? The cancer's not you, but you have a condition. Even as good men on a good journey with a very, very good Father, we contend with this false self. So journeying with God is all about discovering how loving and good He is and how good and loving He's made me. The other day I was in some time just praying and asking God a question. God, where are we now? What's in front of us now? And I heard learning. I said, oh, God, you're going to learn some stuff. No. Right? Right, guy? I'm still a customer. I'm still learning. This is a stage I've never been in. 23, 21, 18-year-old children, on the other side of 50, stepping into a ministry season where Greg and Scott Jennings and Patrick O'Brien are coming on our team. You know, we've been kind of a little smaller mom and pop. Now we're growing. I've not done this before. So doesn't it make sense? Jesus, where are we now? What's next? Learning. Learning how? Oh, good. Right? But all of us find ourselves in those moments where it's important to know that the training I'm stepping into is learning how. And how do first times go? Not so well. But that's why you need first time, so you can get to the seconds and thirds and learning how to love well, how to fight for love, how to enter in. Anything that you've stepped into that you've been warned? Any aisle you've walked down that you were warned? Not enough. And all of this oath, what resonates with so many men in this story or in Braveheart or in Gladiator and these stories of being invited up and into something large, to having a part, to belonging, to being significant, and being entrusted with something that you're going to have to manage or steward or be responsible for. That is the stage, and this is the transition from kind of that cowboy ranger to now the warrior that we need to talk just a little bit about. The warrior stage is a stage that often starts about the mid-teens and goes on up through 20s, maybe even the 30s. The learning, the inner discipline that's required. Sometimes it's learning what's just enough and learning what's too much, learning what's not enough, and the inner discipline that's required to willfully and to exercise a will of how far do you want to go. It's a stage that is failures become a little more significant. They typically involve others. When you're a cowboy ranger, your failures should mostly just involve you and the learning how. But when you step into the next stages, your decisions and your will and the failure that happens in the warrior stage and the next stage start to impact others. I mean, how much trouble did you get in or were gotten in this stage? And did you do it by yourself? No, this is when we kind of found our pack, found some of the guys to run with, the blind leading the blind. This is a stage when people can really get hurt. You get a driver's license. People get in your car with you, or you get in other people's cars. There's a reality to this is dangerous stuff. Right? The circle goes from the living room and the bedroom when you're a boy to the front yard and the backyard and down the street. Now you're going cross town and maybe even cross state. right? This can be a dangerous time, right? This is an important time to begin to have the question answered already. You hope that you have a strength, and it's for others. You have a strength, and it's for others. If Cowboy Ranger doesn't go well, then you're going to use your strength in the warrior stage. You're going to use others. Anybody been used by others? Anybody, unfortunately, practiced the using of others? This is the time when David is called out of the fields, the shepherding fields, where he has had his strength tested, and he now steps into a battle with Goliath. And what happens after Goliath? He becomes a captain in the guard. He is given responsibility. It goes not so well for him in the betrayal of the king that happens later, but David is entrusted with more. And we see this in these stories. Moses is entrusted with more. Daniel is entrusted with more. Joseph is entrusted with more. Do you know those stories and how they progress? And there's a glory to their lives. In the warrior stage, it can really start to come out. Either the assault on that glory is going to come out, or the trueness, the authentic swing is going to come out in this stage of warrior. This is a time when a man encounters evil and becomes aware that there are evils in the world. It's the end of a naivety and innocence. And he begins to choose which side will he be on. Which team will he play for? Who is his king and what is his cause? Those are all significant to the stage of a warrior. Very important to the warrior is to have a king. And to have a good king in which he can serve and become an apprentice of, learning how things work at this next stage. Having it modeled for him what a good husband looks like. Having it modeled for him what a good father looks like. Having it modeled for him what a good employer looks like. And you know what's just as important? Knowing what a not so good one looks like. Oh, God will bring into a warrior's training a not so good boss. Why? He wants you to see, David, what a not so good boss is, right, Jack? So you don't become one. But if you misinterpret that, you'll misinterpret God and you and the whole purpose of the training module. He'll show you what a bad marriage looks like. He'll show you what a father who isn't fathering well looks like. Do you understand how important those are to see and experience so that you don't become those? Oh, there can be wounding vows and agreements, but there can become glorious vows and agreements. I will not be like that. I got a father who was operating for a lot of years out of a woundedness because his father didn't get involved and engaged, so I got a very involved and engaged father because why? My dad's vow, I'll never be like that. But all the while he was operating from woundedness. So guess what he could never fix or get healed? By being present with us. The wounding of his father to him. He had to go to Jesus at almost 50 in this message and get healing from that so that he could be present with his boys. Now we're in our 30s and 40s and he's free. Do you understand the difference? He's not trying to prove to his dad that he's a better man. That had to get healed and dealt with. Now he can just be our dad and be free to love us and us love him. So the warrior is a season and a time where, a lot of young men go off to war. We look at World War II. We look at our military now, entering in, boys, very, very young men. We often use this term, and I would encourage you not to do it, not to throw it around too early, too flippantly. We'll talk about 8-year-olds and 9-year-olds as young men. I'd encourage you not to do that. They're not. They're still boys. 14, 15, maybe not. it kind of can sound like a compliment, but it might be mistimed and misappropriate that we call our little boys young men when they're not yet. Just something to be mindful of in the worlds that you move around. Because do you know 40-year-olds who are still boys? Oh, yeah. I mean, and that's because of brokenness and woundedness and the vows and agreements that are in place. But this is a time when things that you've been entrusted with, things that you've had to fight for, things that inner discipline has taught you, a skill like gymnastics, a sport. There's those 6th graders and 7th grade boys who are kind of the man boys, Shaven in 6th grade, who played on the teams and were in charge. I mean, they ran the teams. What happened to most of those guys by the time we're sophomores and juniors? I mean, they bloomed early, and that was it. Right? And they got responsibilities that came with that. And then what happens when it came to them too easily? They were just the bigger, stronger, right? And now everybody passes them. They don't do the inner discipline. They don't do what's required. They don't do the sit-ups and the push-ups that the other boys started doing. And the sport just passes them by. Or their grades. They were very smart when they were younger, but they didn't apply themselves in high school and in college. Oh, they're still very smart, but they never brought the discipline that's needed to grow a skill, an ability. This is very, very important to the warrior. And you know this, not until the right order of this is boyhood, beloved son, cowboy ranger, warrior, then what? Lover. What happened to most of us in our stories? The lover dropped in, somewhere in these earlier stage. But it's not until that there's really some warrior training going on that it's well underway should the woman be introduced into the young man's world in his 20s, late teens. But most of us were either thrust onto the field or rushed the field when it came to the lover and the woman's role. In the warrior's life, pain is not punishment. Right? Pain is understood as part of a process. It can be painful to protect things. It can be painful to be a young man of integrity. Right? To tell the truth at all costs. This will be tested in this stage. There'll be that moment in a boy's life, or especially a young man's life, where he's going to have to stand up to an injustice. And how do first times go? This can be very difficult, very challenging. If he stands up to a teacher, if he stands up to an employer, if he stands up to a step parent, if he stands up, these are ripe moments for shame, for guilt, for fear, when he's trying to exercise his heart and this option of, that's not right. We see that Jesus becomes the warrior in his story, don't we? Right? After those first couple chapters of the Gospels, when we have the birth, the Christmas story, we have the temple, it goes a little quiet, and then one day Jesus shows up. Right? And you know the sequence. This is really important. This is warrior time in Jesus' life. He enters into the Jordan and is baptized by his cousin. And at the end of that moment, right, here's our validation. Here's our ceremony. The Father says, "This is my Son in whom I'm well pleased. This is my beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased." Do you know what the transition then is from that beloved son moment? You know what the next verses say? The start of Luke 4. Then the Spirit of God led him into the desert. Did you notice that? Right? He's still toweling off. And he's led by the Spirit into the desert where the Scripture says he's tempted for 40 days. We get the ESPN version, these three. But the Scripture says for 40 days he's tempted, fasting and is tempted. He's going a lot of rounds. And we see in the highlight film, all three of these certain temptations come at a place of identity, right? If you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread, right? If you are, hey, I got an idea. I'll give you, if you'll worship me, I'll give you all the kingdoms. And we see Jesus' response here is really important. He doesn't call Satan a liar here. He doesn't say, those aren't yours to give. Right? He gives a strong left jab with, I will not worship you. We are only to worship the Lord our God. What he didn't say tells us something very significant about that story. Because he didn't say that Satan's claim to all the kingdoms was false. What he says is, that's not how I'm going to take him back. I'm not going to bow to you and worship you and take him back. I'm going to take him back another way. And that takes him through the cross. You see, I used to think the cross was a very passive symbol. Right? How are we going to get right if we don't have him right? The image that we bear. If I have Jesus as a less character in this story, and that's my bar, that's my model, do you see the problem? I would rather put on the Batman and Superman suit than the Jesus suit. But that has been remodeled so greatly in my life. I see now the cross as the most fierce and loving courage of any man ever to lay down his life for his friends. You see how you can misinterpret the story and you get a very different gospel. So the warrior, Jesus, enters into that moment. And that particular passage ends with, then Satan left him for a more opportune time. Don't we know it? You know what happens in the next scene? After that, after Jesus goes a few rounds, his ministry, he moves into the synagogue and begins to declare, it's on. It's time. And that's when he's given the scroll of Isaiah, and he turns to Isaiah 61 and describes part of his mission to heal the brokenhearted, sight for the blind, prisoners set free. He hands back the scroll. And maybe in his best John Wayne accent, right? He says, yep, this is what I'm here to do. Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. I'm here. And game's on. The warrior's here. I think for the warrior, especially our spiritual warrior journey, this person of who Jesus is critical to get right if we're going to get right. If he isn't who you want deeply to become, then you may not have him right. And that's okay, because there's somebody more concerned about getting him right than you, and that's him. He wants to see this remodeled, this image that we have of him. Right? When I say Jesus, there's an imagination that kicks on. How do you see him? How do you view him? What is he like? And the warrior is part of that. The warrior is wounded when he's not taught how to fight. He's not taught to fight, especially in the spiritual realm. How many of you in this message over the last 10 or 15 years were introduced to the battle? How many of you were introduced in the last 10 years or so to the battle? Would you say that your perspective on life before was passive? Okay, got a couple good chuckles. I mean, very disoriented. I mean, we knew we were caught up in a lot of inconveniences, a lot. Things not going well, but we didn't know how it worked. And so that's what's wounding to the spiritual man, and even in the physical realm. If you've never been able to test your strength tested, if you've never been able to understand that you're in a war and that a warrior is needed, if we live in a spiritual battle, then what must we have to have? Warriors. We have to have well-trained soldiers. Paul talks to Timothy this way. Understanding what we're up against and understanding how to enter in. When evil is not in the story, there's only two characters then. You and God. Do you see how we can misinterpret most of our story? The enemy's not responsible for everything. But if he's not responsible for anything, what are the odds of you interpreting your story well? So to go back with a warrior lens and to look back over your story and to see the assault on your life, what the enemy's been trying to keep you from, very, very important work for the warrior. Because the beautiful thing is you can go back and fight battles that you didn't know how to fight when you were 8, when you were 10. Because is eternity confined to time? No. It's just a moment ago. Did you hear when Scott told his wounding story? He could recall all that. Did you see the ball machine? Did you see his dad walk off? It's just a moment ago. I bet he can remember the color. I bet he can remember if it was cloudy or blue, because those wounding moments leave marks and they need treatment. The church in America has really put the warrior out of the picture. It's gotten very soft, very feminized. Our churches, our schools, this is something that we need to be careful how we address and how we... guys pounding the table and putting war paint on may not be the best idea at the next men's ministry meeting. But there's a problem in our culture that we're bumping up against. And the passivity is rampant. Right? You can take a stallion and make him a gelding. And you've got a good horse to load up with a lot of stuff when you get a gelding. Do you understand what I'm saying? The enemy has done a work on this, taking out the warrior and emasculating men and turning them into characters on sitcoms and cartoons. It's not that funny. Homer Simpson. Yeah. Masculinity and passivity are mutually exclusive. So we're going to have to learn how. We're going to have to learn how to be strong. We're going to have to learn how to enter in. My friend Scott has said there's not enough alphas. Your kingdom that has been entrusted to you, and the ring and the sword and this domain, you're going to have to patrol it. You're going to have to go to work on providing, protecting, and keeping it secure. That's why it's so harmful when the father is the one doing the wounding. In the woundedness, no battle to fight. We've had Jesus wrong. There's no place for the warrior. When we lose a battle and we look at it as final and shame and guilt come in rather than training, okay, I don't know how to do this yet. How do I pray against that? Is there a certain kind of way to pray against that? Is there a more productive kind of prayer? Well, look at the Gospels. The disciples come back after one scrimmage and say, we couldn't do this one. Jesus has their attention, right, John, and says, yeah, that one doesn't work with the with the skill that I taught you. Right? Can't you just see the disciples? Well, give us the new skill. Give us the new way. Yeah, well, you only can handle that one through prayer and fasting. Yeah. That would have been good to know before we got beat up. No, I wanted you to be ready for it. I wanted to raise desire. I wanted you to want what's needed in that moment. You came and asked. You asked the right one. I'll show you how. It's training. Changes everything when you see it as training. This past March, April, our ministry was doing okay, but it like a lot of you guys have lived at different times, we were kind of moving into this time of month to month. And my nights started becoming the octagon. I'd go to sleep at night, but I'd wake up at 2 with sweats. Fear would come in the evenings, in the midnight hours. Fear would come in around my dreams, around my sleep, and literally arrest me. And like cheap shots that they were, I'm laying there, and I'm doing, it's like there's this calculator that will not shut off. What needs to be paid next? How much is in the account? What can I take off? Do you know what I'm talking about, anybody? Yeah. And fear is just running through me. I am the boy, Gary, on the floor being pummeled. Irresponsibility accusations. You're not enough. Other people don't suffer. Other people aren't. Your family's in danger. I mean, it's just they're not taunting from the stands anymore. No, they're in, and I'm tangled up in them. It was in that season that I learned how to get out of bed at 2 a.m. and fight back. Because I learned, John, just laying there is not a strategy. Hoping that it'll just go away. So I began to learn what it's like to pray at 2 and 3. There's a term in wrestling called riding time. You know what that is? Riding time is when who has the advantage. And so if you're the red suit uniform, they flip the clock to the red guy because he's on top. He has control. He's not pinned him, but he is now in control of the riding time. And so if it gets close and the final time expires in the match of a wrestling match, guess what they go to? Who had the most riding time? So I was losing every night. At least on riding time, if not pinned. And I would get up and I would try to make things happen and fuel and desperate prayers and go to work on some of these financial things. But even as things got better, fear kept coming at night. Why? Well, they were 20-0. Even when the account balance moved up, what was I still experiencing and feeling? The fear of it going down. So it was a season to learn how to really fight and battle against fear, to bring my identity. If you are Michael, a son of God. Some of these lessons are tough. Tough to learn, tough to experience. But remember what we said? What are we all learning how to do? Overcome. How do you learn to overcome? I don't know what your story is. But I know for mine, those were some of the training modules. Those were some of my encounters and experiences with the enemy and with God. I want to just touch on a little bit of the next stage, lover. The lover. What a stage, right? Again, most of us had it interrupted and assaulted at an early time. We never got our strength. We never came into knowing who we are. The little Winnie Coopers of the world, you know who Winnie Cooper is? From Wonder Years. We all have a Winnie Cooper or two. And the belief, the idea that if I could get her to like me, I would be what? I would be somebody. Some of these beliefs kind of start wonder and innocent. But where does that go through high school and college? When you first subscribed to that idea and it became part of your belief system? It goes with you right through high school and college. And you see, the question that we have as boys, do you see me? Do you love what you see? And as we get a little older, am I strong? Can I come through? Where do we take that package of questions to? Who do we take that package of questions to? To the girl, which is a recipe for disaster. Yeah, fill in that blank. Disaster. And you know why you know? You've experienced it. The train wrecks. Right? And some of us are in them right now. Some of us are in them right now. Trying to recover and redeem from beliefs and attitudes that we subscribe to young. I mean, talk about the locker room. The blind leading the blind, disoriented advice. So much shame and guilt and fear come in this one. No wonder we can't love a woman well and get our answers from God and bring them to her. Did Wallace look like he was bringing a settled heart? Now, it's not to say that he didn't want her, but do you see how it looks when a strong man, he gets his strength from somewhere else and is now bringing it to her, rather than trying to get his strength from her. One's a provider, the other's a consumer. I'll never forget when Craig McConnell said that to me the first time. There's a difference between a consumer and a provider as far as the heart of a woman. Which one are you? But that's how I was taught. That's how I was raised. That was the theology of me and my peers. That this is what a woman's for, using her to feel good about me. This is one that we have to unsubscribe at the deepest level of its existence. This one may take a little time. This one may take a few applications. And then it's going to be one that needs to be maintained and learn how to not fall again, right? You know about IP addresses? I know you do. Do you know how they work? I mean, you're profiled out there in the world, in the universe. Let me say in the cosmos of your identity as an IP address. You know how Google and Facebook make money? You know why they have billions of dollars? Marketing. People pay them to put the appropriate ads in front of your web movement, and every click you make becomes intel. I'm not trying to make you sweat. And why would we think that the enemy of our souls hasn't been watching our clicks for thousands of years? The technology is just catching up with the war, not the war catching up with the technology. And this is a place that we see in the scriptures that many a man has been taken out. What's your relationship with the feminine heart? Who told you that? Who showed you that? We're going to step into that stage some more in the king stage, and Scott and I are going to share some more on that, the lover and the king. What you believed about the feminine heart when you were young, boyhood, cowboy ranger, warrior, went down the aisle with you. And for me, Those were some very important things to unlearn. To see when David, in the scriptures, his men were off at war, David stayed home, passive. When the king should have been with his men, he wasn't. And when did it happen? In the late hours. He's restless. He goes to the rooftop. And you know the story. And God redeems that story. The firstborn with Bathsheba dies. You know who the secondborn was? Solomon. Redemption, restoration.